My name's James Oles, and I'm in Mexico, where I live most of the year. I'm really an independent curator and writer. 2 years ago, for example, I did a big show of Pedro Friedeberg here in the Palacio de Bellas Artes that maybe some of you saw. I also teach part of the year, just one semester every year, I teach Latin American art in a school outside of Boston. So I travel back and forth between the two countries. And I also didn't have anything to do with this exhibition in any way. I was not the curator, which is Alfonso Morales. And I don't work for the Palacio de Bellas Artes or for the Fundación Televisa. So what I'm going to do is do a little bit of what I'm interested in Paul Strand, less than an overview of the exhibition. And I really want to talk about two major things. One is his photographic vision of Mexico that he developed in 1932-33 when he came here for the first time, invited by Carlos Chavez, the great Mexican conductor and composer, but really part of a wave of American artists that came to Mexico following the revolution. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that and try to put Paul Strand a little bit into that context. In 1932, late 1932, Strand crosses the border by car. He drives from New Mexico down to Mexico City, and he goes through Saltillo, and we actually have some photographs that he took in Saltillo. And if you look at these photographs, these are really the first photographs that he's making in Mexico. They're very close to what he's been doing in Taos. There's this sort of distance, and they're almost really like these landscapes, dead landscapes, really, without much of a sense of people. Although, you know, you see some, you get a little bit here, but again, very distant. I wanted to say that Strand was not the only, as I mentioned at the very beginning, Strand was one of many Americans that came to Mexico. What drew Americans to Mexico was that Mexico, for them, represented a sort of opposite of the United States, a sort of a complete departure from the United States. Catholic as opposed to Protestant, rural as opposed to urban, traditional as opposed to fast-paced. Esta exposición en cuanto a la fotografía de la época 32-33, que es lo que estás viendo ahora, there, I switched, whatever, is really an attempt by the curators, both in the United States and here, to give us a richer and broader sense of what Strand did in Mexico in that period. But what Strand thought was important was this. This is a portfolio that he published in New York in 1940 of 20 photographs from his period in 32, 33 that he selected. And he selected the order, and he also, and I'll talk a little bit about how they were produced. This was published in 1940. Everybody wanted a copy. Luis Barragan, for example, bought a copy. But he was also republished in 1967. And what I just want to say here is that, you can look at some of these other photographs. Some of them are more beautiful period or vintage prints that he made of photographs that are in this album. Others are variants or images that he himself didn't choose. And so for historians, this is very interesting. But what's in the end, I think most important sometimes about an artist is, the final draft. This is like the novel. And these are all the sketches and notes and earlier versions that are not published, which help you understand the novel, but in the end, this is what was published. So to kind of create a more luxury product and create images that expressed a little bit more the handmade qualities that he's going to be looking for in Mexico, of the countryside where people wear their own clothing, serapes, sombreros, canastas, all of that, adobe. He has these done as what are called photogravures. They were expensive, high quality prints made from the photographs by an expert team of printers in New York City.
How would you call that in Spanish?
Fotograbado. But this is like the highest end of fotograbado, porque luego también en los periódicos tienes fotograbado, but it's the lowest possible end. This is the highest possible end. So these were very, I mean, they bring out a credible amount of detail, and each one was then varnished. So they put over like a stencil over each one, and then they put a coat of varnish that gave it even more of a quality of like algo viejo or something handmade. And this is kind of interesting because most photographers at this time are rejecting this type of arty photography for something that's direct and honest, just black and white photography. But in this portfolio, Strand was really trying to make an art object, and it works here. He never did. If he had done a portfolio of his New York images, he never would have printed them this way, right? Now, in the portfolio, there's 3 types of images. There are images that are sort of landscapes that all focus on architecture. This is the most landscape of all. There are some others you'll see that are close-ups of architecture, and they're all of doorways or archways or windows. There are also images of religious sculptures in churches seen very close up, and then there are images of people. Now, one of the interesting things is that as you go through and you look at this portfolio, in these 20 images, there is not one thing. Now, these photographs were taken mostly outside of Mexico City. This one was taken in Saltillo. The rest are done in Oaxaca, Michoacán, Estado de Mexico. None were taken in Mexico City, and none, I really challenge you to find any evidence of the 20th century. Not even an alambre, a foco, not even a piece of anuncio de nada. And the truth is that, of course, if you went to Santa Ana, Michoacán, un pueblo de, no sé, 5,000 habitantes, probably in 1932, you weren't going to find very much evidence of the modern world, but I can guarantee you there would have been something if you were really looking for it. And so Strand, what he's really doing here is editing very carefully a specific type of Mexico. The title of the book, I mean, this is much more, I would emphasize, for a Mexican crowd, but also in America. The title of the portfolio is Photographs of Mexico. It is not all of Mexico. It is a very select, edited vision of Mexico that completely excludes all evidence of politics, all evidence of violence, all evidence of modernity in any way. At a time when Mexico was moving quickly into, you know, the 20th century, that was the whole point of the revolution, was to move people out of this into the 20th century, into the modern age, through education, through workers' rights. That was the point of the revolution. In a funny sort of way, even though Strand is sympathetic to these people, I don't think in any way I would accuse him of being a racist at all. I think he feels he's trying to capture the true Mexico, the deep, authentic, you know, lo que dice, ay, ¿cómo se llama? Bonfil, México profundo, you know? He's trying to reach for that. That's fine. But for a US audience in 1940, images like this, on top of all the posters for the tourist board published by the Mexican government, all the postcards that circulated around the world, all the images that were popular in the press of Rivera and many of the other secondary painters, over and over and over emphasized a picture of Mexico as underdeveloped, rather primitive, and in desperate need of some kind of civilizing force, right? Because we can look now with nostalgia at these campesinos wearing rebosos y sus trajes blancos, but these are people that are not participating in modernity. These are people that are excluded from the educational system, that are excluded from the system, the economic system, etc. They're poor people. They're, you know, marginal people, even if they're still the majority of Mexicans. And so there's a funny thing here where he meant to be very sympathetic, but I find it at least complicated. But we can't just look at these images as beautiful images of the campo, because they, particularly for US audiences, they participated in a campaign, just like the images that we see today of narco-violence overwhelm the media in the United States and create an image of Mexico that is also not the reality of, you know, sophisticated restaurants in the Condesa or whatever, right? So I think one of the problems in the United States is always how Americans are getting, whether Americans are getting a balanced thing, because this portfolio, let's say, was totally intended for a US audience.